I'm Evelyn Hart, and this is what happened. I sat in the very last row, in the coldest corner of the chapel, where the stained glass cast long blue shadows across the pews. The air smelled like old wood and lilies, the kind they put beside closed caskets to make grief feel more dignified. My black coat clung to my shoulders like armor, and still, I felt exposed. Not a single person turned to greet me. I suppose they thought I wouldn't come. Or maybe they hoped I wouldn't. Thomas's name echoed through the room as the priest spoke of redemption, legacy, and love. Love. The word thudded like a cruel joke against the inside of my skull. I kept my eyes forward, steady on the polished, mahogany box that held what was left of the man I once knew, the man who once promised me forever and handed me nothing but absence. His mother was 2 rows ahead. She shifted slightly when I entered, but never looked back. I didn't blame her. To her, I was a footnote, the forgotten first wife, the discarded draft of a better story. The room was full, and yet I'd never felt so alone. The service ended, with soft organ music, the kind meant to wrap itself gently around mourning hearts. As people began to rise, whisper, and move toward the exits, I stayed seated. My knees felt locked, but it wasn't grief holding me there. It was something else. A weight I couldn't name. That's when I saw him. A man in a charcoal suit, crisp and deliberate in his movements, walking toward me with something in his hand. His shoes made no sound on the red carpet. He paused at the end of my pew, his expression unreadable, like he'd practiced this in a mirror. "Evelyn Hart?" he asked, voice low, polite. I nodded. "He left this for you." He extended a cream-colored envelope sealed in thick wax. My eyes flicked to the initials pressed into it. TB. For a moment, my fingers refused to move. My chest tightened, my throat clenched, and something old and bitter stirred in my stomach. But I took it, slowly, carefully, like it might burn. The man offered a faint nod and turned away before I could ask a single question. I stared down at the envelope in my lap, its edges pristine as if time had skipped over it. I should have stood. I should have walked out like everyone else. But I sat there, surrounded by whispers that didn't belong to me, holding the last thing Thomas Bennett would ever give me. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense, but he had a presence that turned heads anyway. The kind of confidence that felt earned, not inherited. I met Thomas Bennett in the hallway of a downtown co-working space, both of us clutching cheap coffee and half-formed dreams. He smiled like he already knew me. I remember thinking, this is the kind of man who will either change your life or ruin it. At first, it felt like magic. Conversations that lasted until sunrise. Not just about love, but about ideas, about what we wanted to build, who we wanted to become. He said I made him feel seen in a way no one else had. And I believed him, because when he looked at me, it was with the kind of focus people spend lifetimes craving. We didn't have much, just mismatched furniture and a fridge full of frozen meals. But we had vision. Or maybe it was delusion. He had a startup idea, a consulting platform for small businesses. I had a degree in marketing, a mind for systems, and nowhere else I needed to be. So I poured myself into it. Nights blurred into weeks, and our apartment became half home, half war room. I wasn't just the wife. I was the strategist, the networker, the editor, the ghostwriter. I wrote pitch decks, cold emailed investors, rewrote his speeches. I built the operational backbone behind his charisma. He called me the quiet engine, and I wore the title like a badge. Not many people knew how much of it came from me. And back then, I didn't care. He was the face. I was the foundation. We worked in rhythm, like 2 hands clapping. And when his company finally secured a seed round, we toasted with the cheapest champagne money could buy. He kissed me on the forehead and said, "We did it." I clung to the we, even as his name alone filled the headline the next morning. Little by little, the we faded. I watched it disappear in interviews, in press releases, in emails I wasn't copied on anymore. But in those early years, before the spotlight, before the separation, there was something real. Something worth remembering. A quiet, stubborn kind of love that had once meant everything to me. And maybe that's what made the betrayal so difficult. It didn't come from a stranger. It came from the person I helped build. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruel thing about emotional erosion. It's quiet, like rust. You don't notice until something breaks in your hands. Thomas started coming home later. At first, it was just once or twice a week. A meeting ran long, a client dinner, a networking event. I believed him, not because he was convincing, but because I wanted to. I wanted our life to stay intact. I wanted to be the partner who trusted, not the woman who questioned everything. Our conversations thinned. What once stretched deep into the night became shallow ripples across the surface. "How was your day?" turned into "fine." And when I tried to share something, a thought, a feeling, a funny article I'd read, he nodded, smiled, and looked past me, like I was a painting he'd grown tired of. On weekends, he started traveling. "Expansion opportunities," he said. I smiled and packed his suitcase, tucking in handwritten notes like we were still in love. He rarely mentioned where he went, and I stopped asking. Each unanswered question stacked like bricks between us. The silence between us wasn't sharp. It was soft, dull, deadening. I could still hear him in the house, the clink of his glass, the hum of his phone calls. But I stopped feeling seen. I became something he moved around. A chair, a lamp. Necessary, but not noticed. I remember once standing in the doorway of our bedroom, watching him scroll through emails on his phone. I had just changed my hair. Shorter, lighter, something different. He didn't even look up. I stood there for a full minute before saying anything, and when I finally did, he just said, "Looks nice," without lifting his eyes. I laughed. Then quietly, but not because it was funny, because it felt like proof that he wasn't really there anymore. I stopped suggesting date nights. He stopped noticing my silence. The gap between us became routine, and I adjusted myself around it, like molding to the shape of a cold bed. There were no fights, no slammed doors. Just the slow unthreading of something that used to hold me together. And in that slow unraveling, I began to disappear from my own life. I became the woman who waited, who listened for keys in the door, who stared at her reflection trying to remember what she used to look like when someone loved her. I wasn't living. I was enduring. It was a Friday night, the kind that smelled like expensive cologne, over-poured wine, and curated success. The company was hosting a formal gala in one of those glass-walled hotels that hover above the skyline. I'd spent weeks planning it, choosing the menu, arranging the seating, even selecting the color of the uplighting to match the branding. I stood near the entrance in a navy silk dress, watching employees stream in, laughing, clinking glasses, shaking hands. My hands ached from holding this company together for so long, but that night, I still believed I belonged to it. Thomas arrived an hour late, as always, but he didn't come alone. She was younger, sharper, draped in a red dress that announced itself before she even spoke. Her hand curled around his arm like she owned it. When I saw them, my body went still, not with shock, but with a kind of dread that had been waiting too long to be confirmed. He didn't even flinch when our eyes met. No flicker of guilt, no hesitation. He walked up to a small group of partners, and with a grin introduced her as the woman who changed everything for me. My future. The air left my lungs before I knew I'd stopped breathing. I heard nothing after that, just the rush of blood in my ears. Conversations continued around me like I was invisible, but I could feel the stares, the side glances. The whispered, "Oh my God, isn't that his wife?" I stepped back, into a shadowed corner near the exit, hoping no one would follow. My glass was still in my hand, untouched. I remember staring at the bubbles rising, bursting silently, over and over, like tiny betrayals. He didn't come speak to me. Not that night, not the next day. A week later, the doorbell rang, and a courier handed me an envelope. Divorce. Papers, neatly printed, efficient. He didn't bother with a conversation. Not even a phone call. I called the company accountant to ask about our holdings, the shares I had helped structure, the co-ownership we'd discussed 100 times. She hesitated. "I thought you knew," she said. "Your name's not on any of it anymore." "It was adjusted last quarter. Thomas said it was agreed upon." Agreed upon? I sat at the kitchen table, the same one we'd eaten takeout on when we had no furniture, and I looked at the manila folder like it was written. In a language I no longer spoke, he didn't just leave me. He deleted me. From the company. From the narrative. From the version of the story he planned to tell going forward. And in that silence, in that echo of being erased, I realized what betrayal really was. Not the lie itself, but how easily someone could rewrite your entire worth once they no longer needed the truth. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things or leave dramatic voicemails. I didn't march into his office or beg for closure. The moment I signed the last page of the divorce papers, I became someone else. Not better, not stronger, just quieter. I packed 2 suitcases and left the rest behind. The furniture, the dishes we'd picked out together, the framed photos he hadn't bothered to take down. My sister met me at the curb. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the trunk, reached for one of the bags, and said, "Let's go." Her guest room became my world. A small bed by the window, a desk with a chipped drawer, a bookshelf that smelled like dust and old pages. In those first few weeks, I barely spoke. She made me tea in the mornings and left notes on the counter. I read them all. Sometimes I cried just from the quiet kindness of them. I took a part-time job at a local bookstore. Nothing glamorous, mostly stocking shelves, cleaning the windows, helping customers find titles they couldn't remember the names of. But there was something comforting about touching books again. Stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. Stories that didn't forget the women at their centers. I started therapy. The first few sessions were hard, not because I didn't want to talk, but because I didn't know where to begin. Everything inside me felt muted, like someone had turned down the volume of my life. But slowly, gently, words began to surface. Grief came out sideways, in memories, in dreams, in moments where I'd catch my own reflection and wonder who I'd become. I stopped checking his social media, stopped Googling the company. I deleted his number, not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. In the stillness, I rediscovered small rituals. I cooked pasta from scratch. I walked in the rain without an umbrella. I reread the novels I loved at 25 and underlined new passages that meant something different now. I took myself to a movie alone and didn't feel self-conscious. Not once. There was no applause, no grand transformation, just breath, just space. And in that space, I began to realize that survival isn't loud. Sometimes it's just waking up. Sometimes it's choosing not to shrink for someone else's comfort. Sometimes it's looking in the mirror and whispering, "You're still here. Keep going." So I did. I sat in the driver's seat long after the funeral crowd had thinned, long after the hearse had pulled away with its burden. The envelope rested in my lap like a weight. The wax seal, thick and unbroken, bore his initials in gold. TB. The sun had dipped low, casting orange veins through the windshield, slicing across the dashboard like old scars. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know what the dead man had left to say. But I did. I broke the seal slowly, like I was tearing open something sacred. Inside was a letter. Thick cream paper. Folded once, his handwriting slanted and familiar, though shakier than I remembered. For a moment, I just looked at the ink. It felt like standing in a room where he was still alive. "Evelyn," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And maybe it's cowardly of me to say the truth when I'm no longer here to be held accountable for it. But I'm saying it anyway. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I broke you. I broke us. I broke everything we built. And I know it." I stopped there, already blinking hard. The quiet of the car pressed in around me. I was afraid of how much I needed you. Afraid of what it meant to be seen so clearly by someone I couldn't control. So I chose the version of success that was loudest, flashier, lonelier. I erased you from the company not because you weren't essential, but because you were. You always were. And that scared the hell out of me. I let out a breath that sounded more like a sob. He didn't just rewrite the story, he'd buried the truth underneath it. I've amended the company documents. You now hold 50% of the shares. It's legally binding. No one can touch it, not even her. I've also left you something else, something older than any contract. Tucked behind the letter was a small brass key on a ribbon of worn green fabric. My fingers curled around it instinctively. A key, he wrote, to the cottage. You'll understand when you see it. The cottage. 1,000 images collided at once. Wildflowers on the windowsill, burnt toast on the fire, the way he used to read to me on the porch when we still knew how to be soft with each other. We hadn't been there in years. It had become a ghost, like so much else between us. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the edges together like it might fall apart in my hands. The key sat in my palm, cool and solid. A piece of the past that hadn't yet rotted away. He was gone. But he'd left a thread, and I wasn't ready to pull it. Not yet. But I would. The drive to the cottage felt like moving through a memory I hadn't touched in years. The roads were narrower than I remembered, the trees taller. The last time we were here, Thomas still held my hand on long walks and kissed my shoulder in the morning without thinking. Now the silence beside me in the car felt louder than any goodbye. The key turned with a reluctant click, like even the door had aged. I pushed it open and the scent hit me first, cedar, mildew, and dust. The air was thick with stillness, like time had settled in and refused to leave. Inside, the furniture was exactly where we'd left it. The checked blanket on the couch, the chipped mugs on the open shelf. A photo still hung crooked above the fireplace. Us, sunburned and smiling, arms around each other. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like stepping into a photograph of a life I no longer owned. I walked through each room slowly, my fingers brushing against worn wood, the familiar creak of the floorboards under my feet. The bedroom door stuck the way it always had. I leaned into it with my shoulder and it gave way with a groan. The bed was made, as if he'd been here, as if he'd prepared it. On the desk sat a wooden box, small and square. I opened it. Letters. My handwriting on some, others in his, folded into the smallest shapes. They were from our early years. Notes about nothing, grocery lists, weekend plans, inside jokes. I'd forgotten we were once that tender, but tucked beneath them was something else. A leather-bound journal, the kind he used for sketches and late-night business scribbles. I hesitated, then opened it. The first few pages were raw. She saved. The pitch. Her idea turned the client around. Evelyn's revision made it land. I took the credit again. I flipped through, reading lines that burned and soothed all at once. He'd written down every instance where my ideas had shaped the company, where I'd given him strategy, language, clarity, and where he'd claimed them as his own. He even listed dates, clients, outcomes. It wasn't just guilt. It was a record, a confession. In the back, wedged into the spine, were printed spreadsheets, copies of old company files, the ownership breakdowns. My original name in early drafts, later redacted, replaced. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the journal open in my lap, and stared out the window. The trees swayed gently, the sky, a soft gray. The world hadn't stopped. But inside me, something shifted. He hadn't told the truth while he lived, but he'd left it here. For me. In our place. Where it all began. Where it all unraveled. And now, where it would all turn. The following Monday, I made a single call. My lawyer, Jordan, picked up on the second ring. I didn't explain much, just told him I had something important to show him and that I'd be delivering documents by hand. He didn't ask questions. He knew my voice well enough by now to recognize resolve. The file I brought wasn't thick, but it was heavy with consequence. Ownership documents, the revised will, the journal excerpts, and one last thing, a USB drive barely the size of a coin, labeled with Thomas's initials in black ink. We scheduled the presentation under the guise of a financial review, something mundane enough to ensure attendance, and something urgent enough to get it on the board calendar without too much scrutiny. The meeting room was sleek glass and steel, 10 stories up in the same building I once helped design proposals for. I arrived 5 minutes early. Alone. No entourage, no dramatics. The board members filed in one by one, most of them familiar. Older now, grayer, less alert than they used to be. Then she walked in. Cassandra Lane, the woman in red, Thomas's second act. She wore a smile too polished to be real and took the center chair like it had always been hers. She barely looked at me. I stood. No slideshow, no introduction, just a folder, gently placed on the polished wood surface. "These are the updated ownership documents," I said, voice even. "Half of this company belongs to me. Legally, irrevocably, effective immediately." She laughed. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice the room's composure. "That's absurd," she said, waving a manicured hand. "This feels emotional." "It isn't," I replied. "It's legal." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I pulled the USB from my pocket and slid it across the table to Jordan, who plugged it in without hesitation. The room dimmed as the speaker system clicked to life. Thomas's voice filled the air. I wrote her out because I couldn't stand the truth. She built more of this company than I ever did. Evelyn had the mind for it, the vision. I just took the credit. I always knew one day it would catch up to me. There was no music, no commentary, just his voice, calm, regretful, unedited. He detailed meetings she prepared, ideas she sparked, deals she closed, one by one, a list of unspoken truths. When the recording ended, no one moved. Cassandra looked pale. The silence sat thick and unmoving. I gathered my documents, nodded politely, and left the room without waiting for applause or acknowledgement. Justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly, takes a seat, and speaks only once. That was enough. It didn't take long. By the end of the week, the story had broken. The headlines didn't bother with nuance. CEO erased co-founder's role, now faces legal repercussions. Subpoenas followed. Investors pulled out. The company's stock nosedived with a violence that echoed the very silence I had lived in for years. Cassandra resigned on a Thursday morning, the press release full of vague language about personal reasons and refocusing priorities. No one believed it. The board scrambled, offering me the position of interim CEO within 24 hours. I didn't even hesitate. "No," I told them, voice calm, final. "I don't want the seat. I just wanted the story to be told honestly." They looked stunned, as if they couldn't comprehend a woman walking away from power. But I wasn't walking away. I was choosing something else, something cleaner, something that didn't require me to live inside the thing that once hollowed me out. The media tried to spin it into something dramatic. Paparazzi waited outside, the bookstore where I still worked part-time. Cameras flashed as I walked past, head down, coat buttoned, no makeup, no comment. They shouted my name, begged for interviews. I kept moving. I didn't owe anyone a narrative. Let the papers speculate. Let the headlines swirl. I had no interest in feeding the noise. I had lived in silence long enough to know its worth. The company survived, barely. New hands took the reins. My name, once erased, was reinstated in the history section of their website. Small, factual, a footnote finally restored. But I didn't check it often. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like someone choosing peace when they've finally earned the right to destroy. I had the evidence. I had the power. But I didn't want to rule what had once broken me. I just wanted it to remember I was there. And now it did. I sold the shares quietly. No press release, no victory speech. Just signatures on paper. A quiet transaction between the past and the present. The money hit my account in numbers I couldn't quite comprehend, but it didn't feel like wealth. It felt like something returned. Not a gift, not luck, but balance. A restoration. I didn't want the money to sit. I wanted it to move, to do something. So I started a fund. Small at first, just enough to cover a few legal consultations, a few months of rent for women trying to leave men who made them invisible. I called it the Quiet Foundation. The name felt right. I found a space above a florist's shop. Sunlight poured through the windows in the late afternoon, and the floors creaked when you walked. Honest sounds, not trying to hide. I hired 2 women from my therapy group to help me run it. Survivors, thinkers, quiet fighters like me. They came slowly, the women, some with bruises on their skin, others with bruises hidden in their voices. They all carried stories, and in almost everyone, I saw a version of myself. A younger Evelyn, just beginning to understand how heavy silence can be. I didn't talk much about my own story. Not at first. But one afternoon, a woman named Rena sat across from me with her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. She whispered, "I don't even know who I am without him." And something broke open inside me. So I told her. Not everything. Just enough. About the slow erasure, the quiet exit, the cottage, the letter. Her eyes welled up, and she reached for my hand like she already knew me. Maybe she did. Word spread. Not loudly, not virally, just gently, the way real things do. And before long, I wasn't just rebuilding myself. I was part of something larger. A soft revolution made of returned dignity and handwritten notes that said, "You are not alone." That was the justice I hadn't known I was looking for. Not revenge, not reclaiming a title, but using the truth I'd been forced to carry and turning it into light for someone else. It was tucked between 2 pages in the back of the journal, folded once and fragile with age. The ink had bled slightly at the corners, like it had absorbed the hesitation in his hand. There was no envelope this time, no seal, no ceremony. Just my name at the top in his unmistakable handwriting. I knew it wasn't meant to be sent. Still, I opened it, sitting on the same edge of the bed, where I'd read his first letter. Outside, the wind stirred the trees gently, and a line of sunlight crept across the wooden floor like a slow-moving clock. "Evelyn," it began, simply. "There were things I never told you, not because you didn't deserve to hear them, but because I was too small to say them out loud. I was afraid of how much I loved you, afraid of how clearly you saw me, how deeply you anchored me. And I hated that. You were steady when I was scattered. You held the line when I flailed, and instead of leaning into that strength, I punished you for it. I called it control. I told myself I needed space, power, autonomy. What I really needed was courage, the kind you lived with every day, even when I made you doubt it. I resented the reflection you held up. You never yelled, you never begged, and somehow that made it worse. I could never win against quiet dignity. So I chose noise, affairs, ego. I tried to rewrite the story to make you smaller so I wouldn't have to feel how lost I was without you. And in doing so, I lost the only thing that ever truly saw me. My hand gripped the edge of the paper, knuckles, pale. I felt something swell in my throat. Not tears this time, but a strange, soft understanding. The kind that only comes when the past no longer has the power to hurt you. I folded the letter gently, walked outside barefoot. The cold boards of the porch kissed my feet. I lit a single match and held it to the corner of the page. It caught, slow, then fast, curling into smoke, folding in on itself until the words became ash. I let it fall into the wind. There was nothing left I needed from him, not even his regrets,